Well, good afternoon and welcome to Hudson Institute here in DC. We're a research organization promoting American leadership for a secure, free, and prosperous future. And my name is Jeremy Hunt. I'm a media fellow here. And today we'll be discussing food and farmland security in the 118th Congress. And I'm really excited to be here with my friend, Congressman Austin Scott. We're going to be talking about this issue. It's just like a growing national concern now. And in just 10 years, Chinese ownership of U.S. farmland has jumped from 81 million in 2010 to 1.8 billion in 2020. So what does this mean for American food security when foreign adversaries expand their footprint in the U.S. agriculture industry? And what can Congress do to protect Americans from both a food and national security crisis? So Congressman Scott, I'm so just thrilled to have you here. I'm just going to go through your bio for everyone watching at home. Congressman Scott is in his sixth term as a U.S. representative for Georgia's 8th Congressional District. His committee assignments include both the House Intel Committee. He's also a senior member on the House Agriculture Committee, and both are vitally important to Georgia and the 8th District. And he is a known and respected voice on national security and agriculture issues, and just a fierce fighter for Georgia's military installations and rural communities. He also focuses his work on issues important to Georgia's farmers, including increasing export market access and free trade agreements, bolstering grant programs for rural communities, strengthening crop insurance and disaster assistance programs, bridging the digital divide in rural America, and modernizing agencies within the committee's jurisdiction, like the USDA and the CFTC. Congressman Scott graduated from the University of Georgia with a BBA and risk management and insurance, and owned and operated an insurance brokerage firm for nearly 20 years before joining Congress. And so we're just so thrilled to have you here, sir, and would love to kind of just get your opening thoughts. And I guess the first question we wanted to kind of dive into is, what is kind of to define our terms? What do you see as really, what does food security mean? We hear that term a lot these days. What exactly is it, and why is it important?
Yeah, it means that you have an abundant supply of nutrition available for the people of your country, and it's something that we as Americans have had for many years. We have paid less for our food in this country than virtually anybody else in the world as a percentage of our income. And that is the end result of what I believe to be good, balanced policy with regard to the growing of our crops and the ability to get that crop into a grocery store where people are able to walk in and buy it. And it's everything from technology and seeds and chemicals and growing practices to the transportation system and packaging to get it to the consumer. And so we've done a good job of that as a country in the past. I think maybe so good that we take it for granted now, and we're starting to see some blips, if you will, in that security that we have taken for granted for so long. Just look at the issue with eggs right now, and that is the end result of a flu in our chicken flocks inside the United States. And so something like that is not something that most people think of on a daily basis, but the impact of it is very real every time we walk into the grocery store. Or if you're from the South like we are, when you take your wife and kids to Waffle House, on
Right.
Sunday before or after church.
Absolutely. I know we definitely notice that the egg prices are skyrocketing right now. And I think the issue is definitely hitting home for a lot of Americans, especially during the season. And so do you believe there is an impending food crisis? We've heard that term kind of thrown around as well. Do you think that is on the horizon, or are you confident in kind of our trajectory over the next year to 2 years?
Well, I go to Africa a fair amount, and the Middle East. As someone on the Armed Services Committee, what we consider a crisis inside the United States with food is not what somebody in another country would consider a crisis for food. I think that there is significantly more risk around the world right now than there is inside the United States. And I'm not naive to the fact, though, that we can have disruptions in our food supply chain that causes short-term problems. And if you just go back a couple of years and you think to the issue of COVID and the panic that was created from COVID, when you went into the grocery stores, we were always used to, if you couldn't find the spaghetti sauce that you necessarily wanted, there was still spaghetti sauce on the shelf, right? But it was a situation back then where you didn't have any spaghetti sauce on the shelf, and not just any spaghetti sauce. In many cases there wasn't a whole lot of food, and so people, I think, wisely so, probably have stocked their pantries. And I think that there's a different approach to maybe keeping things like peanut butter and other things on the shelf, just so that you've got a little bit of a safety net. But in America, a food crisis is not being able to get what you want or what you need for 2 or 3 or 4 days, where around the world, I think the risk is significantly larger. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't have something like we've had with the flu outbreak and the chicken flock inside the United States. That doesn't create a tremendous shortage of eggs or a tremendous shortage of other types of protein, and we have to be very careful of that. We've taken it for granted for too long.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, we opened up the event discussing China, and I want to talk about that. It seems that China has a growing interest in owning more and more American farmland, as well as our food supply chain. I mean, they're even buying pork companies and just continuing to increase their presence in our country. So what do you believe is China's long-term strategy? Why is this happening? And if you can kind of just track that with us over the last few years.
Yeah, one of my primary concerns with what I see from China is what they've been able to do with Kim China, which is one of their companies, and they're in some cases buying, in other cases, the Communist Party steals technology, and how they've embedded themselves in seed and in chemicals. Syngenta is a big seed company that is wholly owned by the Chinese Communist government. We are dependent on that seed to plant many of our crops inside the United States. And so China's been very smart about how they have waited on industries in some cases to consolidate and then purchase the consolidation. And so I look back, if you look back many years ago, the Federal Trade Commission probably shouldn't have allowed all of the consolidation that they've allowed. And it concerns me. I'm concerned about the land they're buying, but I'm more concerned about where they're embedding themselves in the actual growing of our crops. Because if we don't have the yields that we've gotten used to in America, then we don't have the food supply that we have on the grocery store shelves. So when you look at the chemical supply, and if you look at the seed supply, I'm concerned about their land purchases, but I'm more concerned about the technology that they control in our food supply chain. And that's an area where, if we're honest about this, Jeremy, this technology is developed for the most part in our land grant institutions. So U.S. taxpayers sponsor a lot of the research to create this technology that creates this robust ag production that we have, and then you end up with a foreign entity that doesn't share our interest or our values owning it. And so we've got to do a better job with making sure that when U.S. dollars are invested to develop that technology, that it doesn't end up in the hands of people that candidly are our enemy.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So that you see them kind of waiting and then purchasing the consolidation. Right. And in terms of a long-term play, so you mentioned the Federal Trade Commission should not have allowed some of these consolidations to happen. What about USDA? I mean, what is the Biden administration doing to stop this? Are they, do you see any level of leadership on this issue?
I have not seen any level of leadership from the Biden administration on this issue. I do think that when things started happening in Ukraine, and we saw, okay, the nitrogen, Russia's the #1 producer of nitrogen in the world. Russia and Belarus both play significant roles in potash, which is another one of the that we use in fertilizer. And if you look at the Black Sea, I do think there was a recognition when things started happening in Ukraine that, we may have a problem globally with the food supply. The Ukraine has been known as the breadbasket of Europe. 50 million tons of corn and wheat that they export on an annual basis, mostly into Africa and Asia and low-income parts of the world. So there's been significant concern, and I do think they deserve credit for this. Concerns about what happens with the Black Sea if when we lose that transit. The problem is when you go to try to build a plant inside the United States to produce nitrogen, the number one cost in fertilizer is energy. And so, natural gas is a big input cost. Well, they're so anti-fossil fuel in that administration that anything that you're going to do that uses fossil fuel typically has a hard time getting permitted. Well, if you're going to produce fertilizer inside the United States of America, you're going to use natural gas. And so their approach to fossil fuels and natural gas is concerning to me with our ability to actually manufacture fertilizer inside the United States. So one of the other things you got to keep in mind, a lot of the fertilizer production was happening in Europe. Well, guess what they don't have now? Is natural gas.
Right.
And so we the world can learn a lot from what has happened with Europe being dependent on Russia for their energy supply. And that's one of the things we're discussing today in Washington and having the votes on the floor today is making sure that we have domestic energy independence.
Yeah, and I've even talked to some farmers throughout Southwest, Middle Georgia, who are saying, I mean, just the price of fertilizer has skyrocketed so much. Now they're actually having a hard time even making any money off their crops. I mean, or have you heard anything from folks in your district? What do you hear on that particular?
Absolutely, and so Jeremy, that is the input cost for our farmers has gone up exponentially, and you remember a lot of our support programs that are risk management tools to our farmers, none of which guarantee a profit, are based on commodity prices that were set many years ago, which were reflective of the input prices that were set many years ago. And so, we're going to have to make some adjustments in the next farm bill in those areas to make sure that in a downside market, that farmers don't lose everything that they've worked for generations to build. And so we're very concerned about the lack of support that we see from the administration for production agriculture. They seem to be more interested in regenerative ag and other things, which if you can afford, more power to you. But there are people out there that will pay $22 a pound for an uncooked chicken because it's a free range chicken. Well, if you can afford that, God bless you. And if you want to go buy that, that's fine. But most of the people I know, like me, like to be able to walk into Publix and buy a rotisserie chicken that's cleaned and cooked, for $7 for the whole chicken. And if you can afford to pay, 10 times that for your chicken, that's fine, but most Americans can't. And so I'm concerned about them thinking that you can take the practices that the uber wealthy want to support and apply that to production agriculture, and Americans not feel the pain of that every time they walk in the grocery store.
Yeah, exactly. And I definitely know that one. I actually bought a rotisserie chicken just last week at the
Yeah.
So speaking of some of the legislation, I want to get to I have more questions about the Farm Bill. But before we do that, I want to talk about the PASS Act, Promoting Agriculture Safeguards and Security Act. You co-sponsored that in the last Congress, and you have plans to again in this Congress. How do you envision that legislation improving the food security and kind of getting accountability of this issue with China investing on our land?
Yeah, it'll be submitted either today or tomorrow, I think, and it'll be very similar to what's been done in the past. We do not need countries who don't share our interests or our values, and China is our enemy, owning land in the United States. We don't need them owning our agricultural land, and we don't need them owning land next to our military bases. And I will tell you, I don't think we need them owning land, period, inside the United States. So I've actually encouraged, Jeremy, people at the state level to address this as well. You have, I've got a map here about 12 or 13 of the states, I believe, already have some type of foreign ownership restrictions on land. Whatever state you're from, I think you should have this discussion with your state legislatures. I'm having it with mine. Land is titled at the state level.
Right.
And I'll tell you, it's a lot easier to get changes made at the state level than it is at the federal level. So I'm talking with my state legislators as well about it, because I think that they need to, they can take action a lot faster than we can. And I trust the state governments more than the federal government, candidly, and that's coming from a guy who's in the federal government.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And does that, and the state level legislation, even at the federal level, will that also kind of tackle this issue of China buying up our food supply lines? Buying up, as you mentioned, the buying pork industry and all these kind of big consolidations that we've seen. Is that going to?
Yeah, I don't think it will have much impact on that. And of course, what you're talking about is the fact that we've had so much consolidation in the protein processing industry, that if they decided they wanted to shut it down, I mean they can hurt us with what actually makes its way to the grocery store. There's some legislation that people have talked about with how we get more smaller meat processing places opened. There are some ideas about how you do that. Then you got to get that meat that's being processed locally. It becomes a question of how do you get it into your local grocery stores? How do you get the Walmarts and the Publix of the world to buy from a small meat processor instead of the supersized processors that are out there, if you will. So there's some very serious and real benefits to America in having multiple supply lines in any of our basic necessities, but especially in our food supply.
Right. That makes sense. And from what I understand, there used to be an act, it's still in the books, in 1978, the Foreign Investment Disclosure Act, that was supposed to kind of deal with some of these issues. Does it have any teeth? I mean, do we need to relook that particular legislation, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you've done your research to look that up. I mean, it's one of those things that probably need, like any piece of legislation, needs to be looked at again. And it's one of the things that when we go to write the farm bill, I think you're going to see a lot of discussion about the supply lines, about what are we going to do about fertilizer in the future and input cost? Where's it going to come from? We certainly don't want to be dependent on Russia for our nitrogen or China for our seed supply. And so I think you're going to see a much broader look at how we as a country address all of these issues, with the way people who don't share our interests or our values have embedded themselves in our supply chain, and we shouldn't have allowed it to happen. If you recall, there was a discussion many years ago that, well, if you allow China, into World Trade Organizations and other things, then China will become their conduct will improve, and they'll act more like the free world. And Jeremy, as well as I do, it just hasn't happened. And I don't know anybody that has a faith that it will happen.
Right. And another thing, I mean, you talked a little bit about energy too. In addition to China buying up some of our farmland, you also see this kind of, when I drive through South Georgia, you see fields of solar panels. A lot of farmland is now turned into, these kind of solar panel fields for energy, for different types of endeavors. Now, is that a concern when it comes to food security as well? What are your thoughts on that, and how do we kind of get a hold of that?
Oh man, if I had a hammer here, I'd bang on the table with it. Jeremy, in my part of the world, and I grew up in Tift County, so I'm south central Georgia, and good farmland in that area, 4,000, 5,000 an acre, depending on what county you're in, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. The solar companies are coming in, and they literally are paying, in some cases twice what the land is worth. And that land is coming out of production agriculture. If you listen to them, they'll say, well, it'll always be there, and you can always, go back and put it back in production if you want to in the future. I just don't believe that's the case, Jeremy. I mean, if you look at a field where you had an old barn, you can always tell where that old barn was. And I personally believe that that's because of the runoff of the the galvanization on the tin roofs. And so if you look at the way solar panels are made, all of that galvanization on the metal, every time a raindrop hits it, a little piece of it drops off. And there's all kinds of cement in the ground. It's been compacted. It is, I think that it would take years to dig up a solar field and get that back into productive ag land.
Wow.
So I'll tell you, if you're an environmentalist, probably the worst deal that you're getting as a taxpayer and an environmentalist, I believe, is in solar subsidies. If we talk about the environment and conservation, on I-75 in South Houston County, they've cut down, hundreds and hundreds of acres of forest land and leveled it and turned it into solar fields. Well, look at all of the wildlife habitat that you just destroyed. And so why are we using this technology that even people on the left are saying solar technology is old? We need to move to other forms of energy. Why are we allowing solar subsidies so large that they can pay significantly more than the land is worth for the land and still be as profitable as they are? So I think solar subsidies are probably the worst deal the American taxpayer gets. We're now seeing, I don't know if the offshore wind is what is leading to the death of so many whales on the East Coast, but we've had more whales die on the East Coast in areas where they're doing offshore wind.
Wow.
I think there are very serious consequences to our natural resources with ignoring something simply because it's deemed to be green energy. It's like we just kind of at least some people close their eyes and pretend that the environmental impact doesn't need to be studied of offshore wind and solar panels going into our forest lands and our fields.
Right. And do you see with the new Congress and Republicans taking the majority in the House, do you see us getting some accountability of that, maybe some oversight of that issue when it comes to some of the green energy policies?
I think you're going to see us talking very seriously about solar subsidies and subsidies that are a raw deal for the U.S. taxpayer. If a subsidy is so big that it allows you to pay twice what the value of the property is worth, and you're still going to be profitable, and then those subsidies need to be addressed. And candidly, the solar industry has been around long enough that I think all of the solar subsidies should go away.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I want to talk too, I'll be remiss if I didn't talk about the Farm Bill coming up this year.
Yeah.
What are your general thoughts? We've heard in the past how sometimes our farmers are only getting 20% of the bills actually dealing with our farmers, and 80% of it is all about, nutrition and everything else. What are your thoughts on how we can make sure we're protecting our farmers? Because obviously the farmers are the heart of our food security. And so
that's right.
What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm waiting on the CBO numbers to come out, which is the Congressional Budget Office. They will actually give us the baselines. I'm concerned with where I think what is referred to as the baseline will be, with how much financial support there will be for production agriculture versus how much of the baseline is going to be going to nutrition and other parts of the Farm Bill. It's partially a math issue, Jeremy, in that with commodity prices being as high as they've been, the U.S. government has not spent as much money in helping with price loss coverage and other things. But the fact of the matter is, the input costs are so much higher today. The risk is significantly higher in ag production, and you lose a whole lot of money at a commodity price that you would have made a whole lot of money at just a couple of years ago. And so I'm afraid that the CBO numbers may come out and give us a false sense of security with what needs to be done for agriculture. And you're from a part of the world, as I am, where when Hurricane Michael came through, I mean, we saw that even when we had farmers who were insured, we saw the shortcomings of our current system. And then we as Congress had to go back in and we appropriated right at $3 billion for the losses affiliated with that one hurricane. You had a $1 billion timber loss just in the state of Florida. When you get into the state of Georgia, as you know, it straddled the 2nd congressional district and the 8th congressional district, and if it had not been for the work of our university systems helping us get the right numbers and show the people in Washington, D.C. where the losses were, we would not have recovered from that storm. And we still have people that didn't recover from that storm. But the Washington, D.C. agencies felt like a third of what was actually ended up being appropriated was going to be enough, and that existing programs were going to do the job. Well, an existing program was going to give a pecan farmer about $10, Jeremy, for the loss of a mature pecan tree. Well, I don't know how much it costs to clean up a pecan tree that's laid down on the ground, but I'm pretty sure that you can't clean it up for $10. And you sure can't get it replanted, and then it takes 14 or 15 years to have a harvest off of one of those trees. So there are a lot of areas where we have a lot of farmers that have tremendous money invested, and we need to make sure that they have the ability to insure their crops.
Right. And I totally understand that. And do you see it being more of a bipartisan issue? I mean, is this something that you see even some Democrats coming to the table and waking up to this problem as well? Or what are your thoughts on that end?
I hope so. I mean, there will be a big discussion on nutrition. I mean, I've got my ideas on nutrition that are going to be different from some of my colleagues that are Democrats. I mean, I'm very much in favor of work requirements for people who receive nutritional assistance. I think we get plenty of money in this country to take care of people who can't work. I don't think any country's got enough money to take care of people who won't work. And by the way, you're not doing somebody a favor by creating a scenario in which they don't have to work. I mean, we were put on the face of this earth to do several things, and work is one of them. So I would like to see work requirements tied to nutritional assistance. I don't know if we'll have the votes to do that or not. I don't think it makes sense, Jeremy, that you can take SNAP benefits and walk in and buy a Coca-Cola and a candy bar, but you can't buy rotisserie chicken. And so I look at the way we eat today in this country. If we're honest about obesity in this country, and I'm certainly glad that I'm not that I'm only showing my the shoulders up. If we're honest about this, if we look at the population on nutritional assistance versus the population that's not, we've got an obesity problem in both areas, but we've got a bigger obesity problem with the lower income population as a whole, statistically, than we do in middle income and upper income families. And I just think that we need to be making sure that if we are spending people's tax dollars and we're calling it nutrition, that it needs to be nutrition. And there's a whole lot more nutrition in a rotisserie chicken than there is in a candy bar and a soda pop. So I hope we can have an honest discussion about that. It's not about telling people what they can and can't buy. It's not that I don't want anybody to have a candy bar, but we've done this with other benefits like WIC, which is women, infants, and children, where there are restrictions to fruit and dairy and other things that are nutritious. And I'd rather see the tax dollars go into things that are nutritious, not candy. That's going to be one part of the discussion. The other part will be the work requirements. And then it's going to be the total dollar value, Jeremy. I mean, if if there's a demand that 75% of total farm bill spending goes to nutrition, and 10% goes to ag, and 2% goes to conservation, and 2% goes to forestry and other things, I think we have a hard time. We've got to have an honest discussion about the money that we have and what's a square deal. Because I promise you, the people who are on the nutritional assistance, they need the farmers to be growing the crops just as much as anybody else does.
Right.
So I'd like to see us focus on how we get the best nutrition for people. It's not about taking anything from anybody. I just, if I'm perfectly willing, I don't speak for the whole committee, but if work requirements on SNAP benefits saves us X numbers of dollars, I'm perfectly willing to take that X numbers of dollars and give it to food banks or after school programs or other areas where people depend on to get nutrition. But I think it's a disservice to the country and to the people to allow people to stay on a SNAP program that are able-bodied working-age adults that don't go to work.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your leadership on this particular issue. And one question I had too was talk about nutrition, and many places throughout South Georgia too. I mean, you see this and all over the country. I mean, in all the places you see this kind of these food deserts where they don't even have access to a good grocery store. All you got is a Piggly Wiggly, and the whole county. I mean, how do you see us kind of combating that? Just making sure we have we're talking about food security, but actually nutritious food security. How do we do that?
No, it's the challenge, right? Because you've got to have, if you're going to have the store that's going to sell fresh fruits and vegetables, you've got to have enough people walking in the store to buy fresh fruits and vegetables that the person who owns that business can make a fair profit at the store. Because if you can't make a profit, you can't pay the power bill. If you can't pay the power bill, you can't stay open, right? So I do think that if in many of the cases, you see food pantries and other organizations that are able to buy food by the hundreds of pounds instead of by the one buggy full, and help distribute that food in what we call food deserts. If it is a food desert in many cases, and I've got a lot of counties, I've got 30 counties, and in some of those counties, the finest restaurant in town is the gas station, right? And so, you go there and get some fried chicken fingers and some French fries, and it might, cure the hunger, but ultimately it's just not good for you. So that's one of the challenges that I know there are a lot of people out there working, through food pantries and other areas to try to figure out how we best do that. And we're going to have to lean on some of the not-for-profits that are out there that have made this their mission. And again, what I would tell you, Jeremy, it makes more sense to say, all right, able-bodied working-age adults, you've got 24 months, but after that, you've got to come off the program. And so, whatever savings we have there, I'm perfectly willing to put that into food banks and other things. The other thing that's got to happen, Jeremy, is this cliff issue that we have, where if someone goes back to work, they immediately lose their benefits. That's something we as Republicans want to fix. I mean, I want somebody to be better off when they go back to work. And so we've talked about some type of residual benefit where, you go back to work, you get to maintain your benefits for a few months, while you're still, catching up and getting your feet up underneath you. We don't want to hurt anybody. We want people to go back to work and be better off at the end of the month than they were before they took their job. And it's math, and we got to find that right way to do it.
Yeah. As we kind of come to a close here, I want to talk just to get your thoughts from, as you're talking to farmers throughout the district, the people who are really, making sure that leading the way on this food security issue. There's still kind of this divide. I've seen this. Some folks, maybe from some urban environments, just don't know what life is like in these rural communities. Yeah. What are you kind of hearing from farmers, and how do you think everyday people can kind of close that divide and kind of bridge that gap?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of frustration over the stuff that's been done, Jeremy. That where race has been the only criteria uh, in the benefit that's been passed. And so I think there's a lot of things that we can do, and we'll have broad agreement on, where it's beginning young or a small farmer, with how we provide assistance to beginning young and small, how we maybe help them through land grant institutions with how you are a small farmer, and you do this, and you go to the farmer's market and you sell your product, so that you actually get, a dollar for every dollar that someone spends with you. Where in production ag, when you buy something at the grocery store, the American farmer gets somewhere around 10 to 12 cents probably of what you're spending at the grocery store. So there are things we can do. I'll tell you, I get very frustrated with the Democratic Party when they want to tie it totally to race, and not to the size of the producer. And again, beginning young and small, let's do everything we can to help people get started and push forward in agriculture. And I think you'll find broad consensus on how to do things. That doesn't seem to be the way that the Biden administration wants to go. They've done a few things in the past that the federal courts have overturned because they were discriminatory, and they actually excluded people because of the color of their skin. And so it's just, it's one of those things, Jeremy, where you just got to have the honest conversation about, we don't need to be using that criteria that the Biden administration demands as whether or not someone does or doesn't get some help. So let's do it for beginning young and small. I do think that, Fort Valley State, for an example, what we've done to help there with scholarships for agriculture at some of our HBCUs, I think that helps. And happy to do all of those things. But the urban divide versus the rural divide, I think the key to it, Jeremy, is you just got to have people understanding that I don't need Amtrak. I'm from the state of Georgia. I don't need Amtrak. So, if you want to attack me because you don't want to pay you don't think that crop insurance is a valuable use of government resources, then because it doesn't help you in the metro area if you take Amtrak, then just understand, I mean, there 435 of us. Most of us get along a lot better than people think we do, but we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And we're all in this together is the bottom line.
Yeah. So, I couldn't agree more. I think that's just such a great note to leave this on. I mean, we have to find a way to bridge that gap and realize just the importance of this issue. And so I know I'm very thankful for the farmers in our community who are just continuing to make and I thank you for your leadership too. Now on the House Armed Services, House Intel, and on ag. I mean, really at the intersection of these issues, making sure that we are keeping our country safe, making sure that we're protecting farmers, making sure we're protecting our farmland, and ensuring that we stay at producing a food surplus for generations. And so, and I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but I just want to thank you for being here with us.
Well, man, I appreciate you. And that last question is the toughest one, man. The urban, suburban, rural divide in the country. I mean, you take an urban Republican and an urban Democrat, they're just as likely to vote against the Farm Bill. And both of them are. we got to talk with both of them about the value of agriculture and the American farmer. And we as a country, we spend very little on our food security. We spend very little on our food security, Jeremy, and we've had it pretty good for a long time with how little we pay for our food supply. And I mean, we I know you got one on the way, and you look what happened with the baby formula shortage. Yeah. These are things that too much consolidation in our basic necessities, and how we get other companies up and running is going to be a challenge.
Absolutely. No, that was it was a scary time for many of us with young kids with the
Yeah.
Formula 1. And we just have to wake up to it. We can't get complacent and thinking that, we're all okay. We have to make sure that we're staying on a proactive end. So I thank you for all the work you've done. And for everyone watching at home, we just thank you for joining us. We enjoyed this discussion. And we're going to keep tuning in to Hudson Institute for events like this. We're talking about what we can do to make sure we have a free and prosperous future for the United States. Thanks for joining us. Have a good day. Thanks, Congressman.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy.